Going heavy all the time for 4 weeks could be too fatiguing and too hard. Doing squats 6 times per week. Basically put all of these tips together from all of the coaches that I've had.
Rising star.
Alba, as a junior last year, competed in the Open.
And there it is. Match totals for Alba and Chiara heading into deadlift.
Easy work of that. Ow!
And look at Alba.
2024 edition from Sweden, Alba Boström.
Hi everyone and welcome to another YouTube video. In this video, I just shortly wanted to talk about how you can think when you're gonna start programming for your squats in order to actually make progress. I'm gonna put this in, or basically split this into a few tips, namely 5 tips for programming your squats. All of these tips, you can use them, and I would basically just start at the first tip and then work your way up to tip 5 when you look over your own programming for squats, especially if you're programming it yourself. With that said, let's get into it. So the first step when you're gonna start programming your squats, if the goal is to actually get stronger in the squats and lift more weight, I would first start with checking your frequency of your squats. So how often do you squat per week? I would definitely recommend for pretty much the majority of people to start with 2 squat days per week. And then if you feel like you're hitting a plateau after you follow all of these 5 steps that I'm gonna talk about, if you find yourself still being in a plateau of some sort, then what I would do is I would try increasing to maybe a 3rd squat day and maybe even going up to 4. There are some powerlifters doing squats 6 times per week, although it's very, very rare. The most general tip for how many times to squat per week would definitely be 2 to start with. When you have 2 days, you want to go into tip number 2, which is sort out one day that is your primary squat day and one day that is your secondary squat day. And if you're squatting 3 times per week, then which is your tertiary, I can't say this, but your 3rd squat day, we could think about it. So the primary day is going to be where you're gonna lift the most amount of weight for the week, versus the secondary is gonna be, you could think about it as a supportive session to that primary day. You're still gonna get stronger, you're still gonna work on that session, but that day is gonna be lowering the weight. So that's why we have the primary day and the secondary day. And if you have 3 days, you could think about it like a ladder, where you start with having one day that is your heaviest in the week, and then the session that is after that day should probably be your easiest session of the week, and then you're gonna have your next to best heaviest session of the week, meaning your secondary day. And what I mean by that is basically you think about it like easiest day, secondary day, so 3rd day, secondary day, heaviest day. Like a ladder, it gets heavier all the time, because after the heaviest day, that's when you will be the most fatigued. So if you have 3 days per week, you're gonna be the most fatigued after that one. So the session after the heaviest day should be the easiest of the week. And then the session that is closest to the primary day before should be a little bit heavier than the easiest day, somewhere in between the primary day and the easiest day. And if you do 4 times per week, it's not gonna look the exact same, but it probably will be about just as easy, if not easier than the 3rd day. So the more sessions you add in, you're usually not gonna go that much heavier. It's more gonna be more active recovery, technique work, and supportive sessions for the primary and the secondary day. So when you have 2 squat sessions per week, you work on both those sessions, but the fact is you're not gonna be fresh all the time. You are gonna get fatigued, no matter if it's squats, if it's deadlifts, if it's military presses, if it's a bench press. You're always gonna have some kind of fatigue when you've done a movement, especially when you've gone heavy. You're gonna have that differentiation where one session is gonna feel way better and one session is gonna feel worse. And so once you have this secondary day and you have the primary day and you've identified which is which, and if you don't know, and if your program doesn't really tell you, if you look at it, if for example, I have a single, and since I'm competing in powerlifting, singles is very important to me. Because of that, I know my primary day is when I have a single. You may not know, and then I would just choose And maybe if you're programming yourself, you don't know, should my primary day be on a Monday, a Wednesday, a Saturday? It doesn't really matter, but choose to have your primary day on the day when you have the most energy, the most time, and just where you're gonna be able to focus the most. For me, I have that on Mondays, and on Saturdays, I'm cooked. So basically then, once you have your primary and secondary day, you want to see, okay, I want to feel good on my primary day. And if you start noticing that on your primary day, you're actually feeling worse and more fatigued than on your secondary day, that means you're going too heavy on your secondary day. So you want to have that gap between the two. And if you don't have that gap, that probably means your secondary day is either, and most likely this is the case, not too heavy. It's not light enough for you to actually recover and have that gap, or you're not actually pushing your primary day hard enough. I would say most people fall into the first pocket and not the second pocket, because most of us, when we're starting lifting heavy and we like it, we tend to really want to push ourselves. So usually our problem is that we go too heavy and not too easy, but I see it often with beginners that for them, maybe they don't push this primary day and the singles enough to actually feel that differentiation between the two sessions. But so that's the second tip when you're programming. Have a primary day, have a secondary day, think easier on the secondary day. And after a while, when the primary day starts feeling amazing, you're actually always gonna feel tired, a little bit shitty and more fatigued on the secondary day. And especially the third day, if you have a third squat session as well. So you probably won't be very likely anymore to actually go too heavy on the secondary day, because you're so used to going heavier on the primary day that you're always gonna feel that fatigue when it's time for the secondary day. So the weights are gonna come down automatically. That was tip number 2. Now, tip number 3 is to cycle your training with blocks. Okay, so what does block training mean? So as powerlifters and in most training, actually, even though you don't want to compete in powerlifting, if you're just training to get stronger, build muscle, I truly believe in cycling your training. And how we usually do it is we have a 4 or 5 week training block. So after that 4 or 5 weeks, sometimes it's 6, but after that block, we basically just jump into a new block. And usually the training block of 4 to 6 weeks, it's called the micro cycle. And then let's say if we look at 2 blocks, that could be the macro cycle. So basically we have micro is the one program that you're doing right now, the block you're doing right now. It's gonna have a specific focus, but when you put it together with other blocks, you're gonna get a macro, which is the macro goal. So let's say right now in your training, these upcoming 2 to 3 months, you really want to make a push to get stronger. Then that could be, you could have a macro cycle of, okay, now I'm gonna get stronger. And that macro cycle is then gonna contain of multiple micro cycles of those 4 to 6 week blocks that you put together, and each of those are gonna have a specific goal. At least this is how I do it. So what I would do when I say cycle your blocks is I would basically go from I would start with a hypertrophy block, and then I would go into a strength block. So if you just start with this is just gonna be 8 to 10 weeks. So it's not gonna be that long. You could add in, sometimes right now I'm training for Sheffield, I have 20 weeks. So right now instead it's gonna be hypertrophy, strength, hypertrophy, strength. That's my macro for Sheffield. And I have 4 micros. So I'm just putting it together, but as you see, it's still hypertrophy and then strength. And in a hypertrophy phase, as a powerlifter competing, I still have top singles. You don't necessarily need to have that. If you can be conservative on your single and not think too much on it and still push your reps, I think you can have singles year round. Otherwise, if you can't do that and the single is just messing with you mentally and it takes all your focus, so you don't have that energy for your reps, then I would remove it during a hypertrophy phase. And if you're having a 4 block macro cycle like I do, I would even remove them on the strength phase that you have as well, since it's far away from the last strength phase of the macro cycle, where we really want to see the PRs you're gonna get. But so basically cycling with hypertrophy, and for squats, I would then do, in a hypertrophy phase, I would do 6 to 8 reps on the primary day for your, and basically maybe 3 to 5 sets, depending on the weight, depending on how taxing that is for you. You're gonna have to try it out. Start with 3, maybe increase after a while. On the secondary day, I would do 4 to 6 reps and then 3 sets 3 to 4 sets as well. And again, you'll just have to try and see. For me, if I do 3 sets of 8 on a heavy weight, I'm gonna be cooked. I'm not gonna be able to really do with good focus 4 sets, so I don't need it. But maybe you feel like you have a good training tolerance, and maybe the weights you're lifting aren't that high as well, and then you can usually do more sets. So the higher the weight you're lifting, the less sets you usually need to do. But for squats, I really like having those high reps, and I've seen it work for so many people, and it works for me as well. So I would do those like high reps during a hypertrophy phase, and then during a strength phase, so the second block, then I would instead do maybe 4 to 5 reps on the primary day, and then on the secondary day 2 to 4 reps. You could also switch it out to doing the 2 to 4 reps on the primary day, but I just find that when you're having a single before then doing heavy triples or something like that, it's hard to have all that much focus and energy into them. So it's easier to have like 5 reps, 4 to 5 reps instead on that day when you have a single on the primary day, and then on the secondary day having those 2 to 4 reps or something like that. And then the lower reps you have, the more sets you usually can have as well. So that's something to keep in mind. For me, I would usually do on a strength phase like 5 sets versus 3 sets in a hypertrophy phase. But you can play around, like I said, you just want to make sure that you're still having quality. You're getting tired on the last set, but you're still having a good amount of quality and focus so you can execute well. If you're super crazy tired and you can't really execute and you just go through the motion rushing through it, then maybe having 1 set less would be better for you to actually have that quality into your training. So that was tip number 3. So tip number 4 is to have basically try either a dynamic program or a static program and see what works best for you. So a dynamic program is a program usually of 4 to 5 weeks where you start with week 1 being very easy, and then you increase the intensity, meaning the weight, each week, where it's basically supposed to be. And usually in powerlifting terms, you would do this with a RPE, and RPE is a scale of 1 to 10 of perceived exertion, meaning 10 is extremely heavy max effort. 1 is 0 effort at all. And usually we train between RPE 6 to RPE 8. And RPE 8 is actually heavy enough to stimulate your nervous system to get stronger without being max effort. And usually you can go up to pretty heavy weights. It's just not gonna be completely max effort, but it's still gonna be very heavy. And as you see, since it's a scale of 1 to 10, RPE 6 is easy, but it's still gonna have some kind of challenge. For example, I could do just my body weight with a squat, and that would be RPE 0 or 1, but you know, that's not gonna give me anything. So I need to go up on weights heavy enough to actually challenge myself a little bit, meaning I could do a RPE 6. It's still gonna be easy. I'm gonna have lots of kilos left, but I'm gonna feel like I have to be tight. I have to focus on my technique and I have to push a little bit, but it's still easy. I can do multiple reps after the reps that I've done and that I was supposed to do. So a dynamic program could then look like you have RPE 6 on week 1. Week 2, you have RPE 6 to 7 maybe, so it's a little bit heavier. Week 3, you have RPE 7, maybe 8, 7 to 8. And then on week 4, you have pretty much RPE 8. Sometimes you can have RPE 9. And so by doing that way, you're gonna increase the weight a little bit all the time each week. This is what works best for me and for multiple people. But then you could also do a static program where you actually have RPE 8 4 weeks in a row. And then you follow that up with a deload week that is super easy. So it would usually look like 4 weeks of static program, the same RPE, heavy training all the time, all those 4 weeks. And then after that, you have an easy deload week where you recover, and then you jump onto a new 4-week training block where everything is heavy again. And for a dynamic program instead, you do these 4 weeks, increasing, it gets up to RPE 8 on week 4, you have a super heavy week 4, and then you jump onto the new block and it's gonna start with the easy week 1 again, so you get that recovery. On a dynamic program, you're not gonna get as fatigued, but it's usually you don't need to go heavy all the time in order to make progress. So I found that both of these work, and the goal is the same in both a static program and a dynamic program, that you want to increase the weight a little bit each week. In a dynamic program, the increases in weight may be bigger each week since you actually went easier on the first week, versus in a static program, you still want to increase the weight a little bit each week, but it could be smaller jumps like 2.5 to 5 kilos. And both of these can work great. So what I would do is I would try a macro cycle of static programs and a macro cycle of dynamic programs and see what works best for you. I found that usually a lot of my clients that struggle with building mass, they don't have as much training years under them, so they don't have that much mass, and maybe they're afraid of increasing the weight, they're beginners. Then it could work really well with a static program where they actually get to lift heavy all the time and just challenge themselves. But when I found someone have more training years under them, and maybe they're older, they have a very stressful life outside of their training, a dynamic program is better because it's easier to recover from. For a lot of people, going heavy all the time for 4 weeks in a row could be too fatiguing and too hard, because you do need a very good recovery from it, which is why it could work for beginners, and especially those that are afraid of increasing their weights and don't lift as heavy weights as those that lift heavier weights. The heavier lift, I found that having those easy weeks is a very good thing. And I think that it's the most popular thing in powerlifting right now as well, to have those dynamic programs where everyone is talking about week 4. You've heard me talking about it's week 1, it's easy, it's week 2. Now it's, I think, like this. If you looked at my videos before when I do my training vlogs, but so week 4 is when I go the heaviest. But either way, try both of those. And what you also then have to understand, and as you can see, is not all training is supposed to be heavy. You basically decide when it's supposed to be easy, and you decide when it's supposed to be heavy. Tip number 5 is instead going to be about how you program your squats outside of your squats. When you implement a variation of the squat, maybe like a pause squat, a tempo squat, which is when a pause squat is when you go down to the bottom and you make a pause in the bottom and then you go up explosively. A tempo squat is when you go slow down to the bottom and then explosively up. You could do a pin squat. When you stop, you have like pins, and you go down and stop on the pins, you get a dead stop and then come up. There's lots of different variation that can work on your weaknesses in the squat. And I would say that if you're having a specific technical weakness that you really struggle with, then I would have a variation on your secondary day. I very often have pause squats or tempo squats because I struggle with maintaining mid-foot pressure and control sometimes on the way down. And when I do focus on that in my training, my squat just moves better. Then previously I've tried all the types of variations you can think about, but nowadays I'm more so thinking, previously I was all about variations. You just pick a variation for your specific weakness and then you stick with it and you do it. And nowadays I'm more about doing just regular squats, especially if you're newer, to just learn the technique. But if you find you have a very specific weakness, try a variation that hits that. And now when it comes to your accessories, the movements that you do outside of your squats, for those, I would program them. So first of all of your accessories should be easy on week 1 or the deload week, no matter if you do a static program or if you're doing a static program during your deload week, if you're doing a dynamic program on your week 1, it should be pretty easy. And then for a static program, it's gonna be heavy all the 4 weeks. But what I would do for a dynamic program is during week 2 and week 3, I would really push your accessories almost to failure. So going RPA to 10, like just really push your accessories on those weeks. And then during your week 4, when it's supposed to be very heavy, you could do this in a static program actually as well. If you feel like it's gonna be too fatiguing, you could do one exercise could be static, maybe you do your bench static and then your squat dynamic. You could mix those 2 programs together, but that's a completely other video. But I would just do the week 4 when it's the heaviest in a static and in a dynamic. I would go easy again on the accessories, because when your compound movement, squat, bench and deadlift gets so heavy, you don't really need to actually add so much more to your training. You're gonna get fatigued anyway, so pulling those accessories back is a very good option, and then you can push it more during week 2 and 3. And when you choose your accessories, I would definitely try to have one exercise that's for your hamstrings and the upper hamstring just beneath your glutes. I would try to have one exercise for your quads. And this is, you could choose any exercise you want, but I would maybe, with each program, you can switch them out a little bit. That's not really necessary. Pick some favorites, and then if you notice that maybe your hamstrings and your glutes are very, very weak, you could work more on those. If your quads are very weak, you could work more on those, but I would try to hit all parts of your legs with your accessories with 2 to 3 exercises per week. I don't really think you need more than those if you really push them. If you go easy on them, then yes, you'll need more, but the hamstring one is mainly for injury prevention as well, and then leg extension is going to be used super well. So for example, leg extensions is one exercise you could do. You could do a pendulum squat, you could do a front foot elevated split squat, you could do for your hamstrings, you could do RDL, a back extension with focus on your glutes and your hamstrings, so it's a different technique. You could Google that one. There's just lots of different exercises you could do. You could do hip thrusts, you could do Bulgarian split squats, and of course you could do like a goblet squat, a heel elevated goblet squats, and these that I named are some of my favorite that I usually cycle and go around all the time. In my current program, I get leg extension and Bulgarian split squat and back extensions, but in my previous ones, I have had RDLs and I had front foot elevated split squats, for example. So you can just cycle these around, but try to hit all parts of your legs, and do push your accessories, but make sure that if you're going crazy heavy on your compound movements, then maybe pushing them will be a little bit tad too much. But like I said, mostly it's just push them when your compounds isn't that heavy, but make sure you still have times when you do push your accessories so you build muscle. And that was the 5 tips. Okay, so to summarize these 5 tips to program your squats, it's gonna be number 1, focus on your frequency and make sure you squat at least 2 times per week. And if you're following the rest of the tips in this video, and maybe you find yourself being in a plateau, or you just want to try it, you could add a 3rd day, a 4th day, you could add days throughout the time. And when you have your days, make sure you identify with tip number 2, what is your primary day and your secondary day, and maybe then your 3rd day. Your primary day is going to be the heaviest, and the secondary day is going to be a supportive session. It's still going to give you work, but it's going to be easier than the primary day. If your primary day feels more fatigued than your secondary day, it means you're not going easy enough on your secondary day. So you want to have a heaviest day and an easier day. And if you have a 3rd, you want to think about it like a ladder, where one session is the easiest, a second one is a little bit harder, and then the 3rd one is the heaviest and your primary day. So you could put your primary day whenever you want in the week. Just make sure the session after that is easier. If you're doing 3 times per week, then the session after that is going to be the easiest. Session after that is going to be in between and before your primary day. So it's going to be a little bit harder, but this primary day is the hardest. Tip number 3 is to cycle your training with hypertrophy training blocks and strength training blocks. So lower reps during a strength phase and higher reps during a hypertrophy phase. Think about it like having a macro, where you could either have a macro of 4 months or maybe 2 months, but either way, from now on to your goal, that's going to be your macro, and then it's going to be split up into smaller micros. And one training block of 4 to 6 weeks, where you have, for example, hypertrophy focus or you have strength focus, that could be your micro. Tip number 4 is to train with a static program or train with a dynamic program. A dynamic program is where you increase the weight a little bit each week, where the RPE, a scale from 1 to 10 of perceived exertion, is usually the easiest on week 1 and the hardest on week 4. Versus a static program, the RPE is the same all throughout the block, where every week of those 4 weeks is the same RPE, maybe RPE 8, kind of heavy. And then you follow that up with a deload week. I would recommend trying both of these styles to see what works best for you, but try it for a whole macro cycle. So you do a few blocks of the static program and see the results at the end, versus a few blocks of the dynamic program and then see at the end how it works for you. Tip number 5, how to program your accessories. If you're doing a dynamic program, go easier with your accessories on week 1, since the focus is recovery for your entire body anyway. Week 2 and week 3, you can push your accessories very hard, and then week 4, if your compound movements are very heavy, you can actually go a little bit easier on the accessories. And then if you're having a static program, you could do the exact same thing if you really want to focus on your compound movements, especially if you're in a peaking phase. But otherwise, you could also just go a little bit heavy on the accessories all throughout the static program, and then on the deload you go easy with them. So with the accessories, your main focus here is gonna be to just try to focus on pushing your accessories when it's time. And you can also combine a static program and a dynamic program for your accessories for any exercise, for example. So maybe you want to have 4 weeks of pushing one accessory all throughout, but your compound movements is going to be a dynamic type of program, that is also fine. And then for your accessories for squats, I would recommend 2 to 3 exercises at least per week where you work on your quads, your hamstrings, and also your glutes, and you make sure you hit all of those areas with your favorite exercises. And you can change these around a little bit, but once you find a few that works for you, you don't really have to experiment that much with it unless you find that it's more fun for you. With that said, that was all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I also want to say some of the things that I've learned for this kind of program is both that I had Oliver, who was one of my first coaches when I tried a RP training, which was a static training program. That's who I learned that from. I learned a lot from the accessories. Well, I actually got inspiration from Joey B, and I also got inspiration from my second coach, Angelica, who was really great as well with that. And of course, the dynamic program is something I actually learned from doing by being program and coached by Joey Flex. So I basically put all of these tips together from all of the coaches that I've had and all of my experience that I've tried from coaching. Now, actually, I've coached over thousands. I've coached over 1,000 people to get stronger. And so sometimes one program works really well for one person, and then for another person, it doesn't really work at all. So make sure to experiment, try a bit with these tips. These were just the outline, basically just like a cookie cutter approach in a sense, with different things that you could try and the fundamentals, you could say, and the basics of a program. You could try it and then you can make tweaks as you go. And with that said, I hope you like this video. If you have any thoughts on this video, if you have any kind of programs that worked well for you, without what I did not include in this video for the tips, then please make sure to comment below as well. That would be really nice. I'm just rambling along at this point. It was a shorter video, but I know you asked more for the coaching ones, so I hope you liked this video. I will make more of these videos if you liked it. So with that said, make sure to subscribe and comment your ideas and your wishes and ideas for future videos. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Last thing, if you're interested in coaching by my team, you can click the link below this video to schedule a free call with my team. And yeah, we'll get to see if we're a good match in the call then. So with that said, thank you for watching. Bye.